Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic, and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. A number of years ago, I was exploring online dating, and I had a very wide criteria for just meeting pretty much whoever was interested in having an experience and having a cup of coffee. And it definitely resulted in some really great experiences and some startling ones and some difficult ones. And one of the more memorable experiences I had was with a fellow that I dubbed Unemployed Manic Monologue Man when telling the story to friends and others who were sort of following along on my highs and lows of the online dating adventures. And this highly intelligent fellow was living in his parents' basement and out of work, and spent just an enormous amount of time on introspection. And up until I had this fascinating experience with spending an hour in a coffee shop with this fellow, I probably would have told you that introspection is a quality that I look for. And I do think that taking counsel with ourselves, checking in, where am I thriving? Where could I use some work? What do I need to pay attention to? Where am I the common denominator in all of these different results? Like, there's a lot of value. I'm a very introspective person, and I spend time on that. And it's nice to have conversations with people who have gone into those kind of depths. Unfortunately, this particular date was not much of a conversation. To give you an example, I mentioned my job title, shamanic practitioner, and it resulted in a free association of people who had been mean to him, not related to shamanism as near as I could tell, but he felt that they were unethical and horrible and 5 to 10 years ago had done dreadful things, and he, went on to tell me the association in his mind. And from there, he went on to talk and talk and talk, and I said very little. And eventually, after a period of time, probably longer than I would choose to stay in the situation in now, like if I'd met him now, I would have extricated myself sooner. But after perhaps an hour, I said, well, I'm just not really feeling a connection, so thank you so much for meeting me. I'm going to go. And it was funny because he was so eager to connect. I remember him following me out into the parking lot calling, "We don't have to be romantic. We could just be friends. I'd love to be friends. Call me anytime." And, and I'm gently removing myself with no intention to ever call him again, because he had given me a extended manic monologue where he told me everything about himself and everything that he thought, without any questions about me or rapport or matching energy. And if you're listening to this podcast and are interested in the subject, there's a good chance that rapport is something that really matters to you in relating. It's a matching of energy and a harmonizing that is really lovely. It's really beautiful to experience. And I'm guessing that my energetically sensitive listeners like me are not particularly fond of people who relate with the fire hose method, where they're just kind of blasting you with their energy. I have compassion for people who are so hungry to be heard and seen and expressed that they don't have the nuance to have their circuits available to see how they're landing with someone. I think it's a really painful place because it's sort of a self-perpetuating cycle of loneliness. Because if you don't notice how you land and you don't do rapport and you don't get present with the other person, then people move away from you, like this particular fellow who followed me into the parking lot. I was very determined to move away from him and never see him again. And I imagine that was an experience that he had a lot. And full disclosure, in my younger, less socially skilled, bossier, in group project years, I was the common denominator of people who, people couldn't wait to get away from me after they'd worked on a project with me. And the thing was that I had the introspection to go, wow, I really want connection. I really felt like they were all going to be really happy with me because I bossed them around until we got an A on the project. And actually, the minute their grade didn't depend on, hanging out with me, they couldn't get away fast enough. And this has happened over the years with different groups of people, and I'm the common denominator. So I should probably pay attention to that data point. It's probably not them, it's probably something I'm doing, which from one perspective can be really good news, because if you're like, oh, this is not like the nature of the world, this is something that I have control over. And I absolutely would say social relating is a learnable skill. And also, having put a good bit of time and effort into learning it, I have a taste for people who've done the same. And so when someone's wanting to connect with me socially, and really doesn't have that skill, like one of the things I notice is, do they have pathways open where they're taking in the information of how they're landing? So there's kind of a warmer, colder, where you're like, is the energy flowing really nicely with this person, or is it coming off? Is it getting more and more distant? Is there more and more of a gulf? And ideally, people course correct if they're kind of out of sync. There was a perfectly lovely, absolutely beautiful gal who was a friend of a friend, and I ended up in social situations, and she just tended to perform minor emotions in really big ways. So mild irritation, and she would, be sort of expressing her indignation in broad strokes. And the more intense it was, I just really felt the force of that, the more I would pull away. And the result of my avoiding eye contact and stepping back was that she wasn't getting the attention she was craving, so she escalated the drama of her performance. So, these can be these really, really unfortunate interactions. And what I like about having this language for, is this person good at co-creating rapport? Do they pay attention to how they're landing? Are they able to course correct? It's not making anybody bad or wrong or horrible. A lot of times people start putting labels on, like, narcissistic or self-absorbed, when sometimes it's just merely not skillful. They, have gotten into their head, I want to try to impress you so that you'll like me. And it can be really difficult. I really don't think that the Unemployed Manic Monologue Man was particularly narcissistic, but I do think, he wasn't having enough stimulus with other people, so it made him really, really unskillful. And it is a good thing to notice how well people do at really seeing the impact that they have on others. So this is an important characteristic to note sooner rather than later, because people who are really, really oblivious to how they're impacting other people can be really messy. They can do a lot of stepping on toes and bumping into people and, causing havoc. And I just prefer not to get too close to someone who's moving in a way that doesn't have that discernment of, I'm clear about what I need and what's good for me, but I'm also clear that my movement has impact. And there's just a certain maturity to being able to balance those things and hold both of those things in a really clear way. And one of the things that online dating really showed me is there are a lot of really hungry people out there, and I don't necessarily want to be their drug of choice or trying to fill a hole inside of them with my time and attention and engagement. So again, when it comes to other people, there's a lot of discernment here. But one of the things that was revealed that I wanted to talk about, in addition to those sort of nuances of relating, is that clarity that first came to me with the unfortunate fellow on the online dating coffee date experience, which was that introspection by itself doesn't necessarily result in someone who is going to be a great person to engage with. And so I have a number of these data points. Like I'm like, wow, this fellow's really introspective. He has spent an enormous amount of time thinking about who he is. But sadly, the result was this extremely narrative-based identity that didn't necessarily match my experience of him. So another point of discernment when I'm assessing whether I want to move closer and deepen in relationship with someone or whether it might not be the best match for me is whether who they say they are and believe themselves to be and who I experience them to be are fairly close together. And when you get a really big gap between who you experience someone to be and who they believe themselves to be and tell you that they are, that's for me, a good sign to back away from the person. And people who are introspective often can go deeper, can have insights, and that's a really cool quality. But one of the things that moves it from potential for self-absorption and an inaccurate narrative of self and a justification, I'm right and everyone else is wrong. Some of these more toxic and kind of maladaptive ways that this story of self can go is whether the person is getting feedback. And so what I could see about this fellow was he really didn't have feedback. And granted, if you have a loud, intense monologue and don't let the other person get in a word edgewise, you don't really have space for feedback. You don't have any circuits available to take it in. And so I talked about the feedback that's just skillful relating, where you have an awareness open to how you're landing with people so you can course correct or even step away. Like if the person is not having a good time, you may want to end the interaction and not continue to try to make some energy happen between the two of you. Total sidebar, this is a really great aspect of making love, is tuning in to what brings more pleasure, what brings more response, what brings more intimacy and closeness. And if you're touching someone, you're listening to what pressure they like. And ideally, there's also verbal communication, but you're listening to what their body has to tell you about how they like to be touched and what they respond to and what creates more arousal and pleasure. And that's a really skillful way to make love. And similarly, there can be people who are just in the road of it. They're like, here are the things to do, and they're almost not present. They're kind of in their own head or their own experience, and that's just a really different quality or different experience. So obviously this is something that scales from, a casual conversation in a coffee shop to, high levels of intimacy. But one of the really, really important things with this, I think, to make introspection really be successful is that it really needs to be combined with feedback. And I did a really wonderful workshop called Expand the Box, and one of the facilitators is somebody who had done some really hardcore work with sex offenders in prison who were getting ready to be released out into the world, and this was a program to help them to not offend again, which would be a really great thing. And the facilitator talked about having a conversation with someone, and he said, look, have a lot of time on your hands to think while you're in prison. I understand that what I did is wrong. I'm super clear about this. Being locked up, incidentally, very potent form of feedback, I think. It's don't want to get into the ineffectualness or, value of the prison system. I have, of course, opinions about that, but I'm not going to go into those here. But, when someone's like, what I did was fine, and they then get locked up, there's potentially some feedback from society at large that says, no, what you did really wasn't okay. But the facilitator described this one conversation, and he said the man was saying, I've thought about it a lot. I know what I did wrong. What's going to be the value of coming to your program? And the facilitator said, well, you don't get feedback. And the facilitator went on to say, to all of us, the human mind can rationalize anything. It's a really, really important piece of wisdom to know about yourself and to know about other people, is that humans can rationalize anything. And I'm using anything advisedly. So one of the things you may be aware of is when someone's language is peppered with a lot of always and nevers, they're probably in story, because it's improbable that something is always or anything or every, or everything I love turns to ash. That's a pretty extreme statement. If we really went over the person's life who said that, we could probably find examples of them loving something and having a perfectly good experience or journey with it. So I'm using the notion of anything advisedly and deliberately, knowing that usually when people use that kind of extreme language, they're in story. And it's not really everybody's fault. Human minds are bad at statistics. We're good at dramatic events. And this is really good from a survival perspective, because if you statistically know that 1 out of 100 times the rattlesnake will bite you and the rest of the time it'll go away, that's not as useful for your survival as backing away and just trying not to offend the rattlesnake every single time. So our minds have a survival advantage by being more concerned with adverse experiences and value tagging them really, really strongly. It's a survival mechanism that isn't necessarily super helpful in the modern era. Really kind of big eagle eye view of this topic, the human brain isn't all that good at communicating reality to us. And we see a lot of this where people don't make decisions based on science, even if they supposedly believe in science. And it's just a really useful thing to know about yourself and about other people. And we can work with our brain to make it represent reality, if we educate ourselves about things. But we're working with all these things like confirmation bias, which tries to not have us have to change our mind. It can take in a data point that says what we believe isn't true, and our brain can distort it so it seems like it confirms what we believe about the world. It's a really weird thing. And, you can see people, quote unquote, winning arguments on Facebook because someone's gone into their confirmation bias and they're being absolutely absurd. But they don't realize that, their brain has moved in to defend making a change. Neuroplasticity takes a lot of energy, and early humans didn't have secure access to food. So our brains are all about I'm not going to change my mind unless there's a good survival reason, even if I believe something that isn't true. And again, it's not the end of the world, but it's just a really great thing to know about ourselves, because if you're sitting there with the toxic relationship that's broken your heart a whole bunch of times and rationalizing, it would be okay if I texted him or her, you might want to know that your brain could rationalize anything, and whatever your longing is to have out of the relationship or your hope, you may be rationalizing, that it's going to go differently in the face of, yeah, that's probably not true. Whereas if you called your best friend who'd seen you through all the rise and fall of the relationship and went, is it a good idea to text so-and-so? They'd be like, oh, hell no. And here are all the reasons why. So that would be an example of feedback. Your mind's starting to have an agenda of wanting to meet a need of maybe connection, maybe sex, maybe feeling loved, maybe having attention. We get a lot of brain rewards for all of those things. And maybe there's a little addictive nature. So, our brains can give us a reason why it would be okay. There's this delightful woman, Bex Weller, out of Australia, who wrote the book A Happier Hour, where she talks really frankly about her journey with alcoholism. And she talks about what she calls Wolfie, which is the part of her that is always finding a valid reason why she could have a drink. Well, you worked hard, you earned it. Well, it's Christmas. Well, it's this. Like whatever it is, the mind is going to come up with a rational sounding reason why someone who has suffered horribly from their addiction to alcohol knows that not taking a drink would be the best course for them, and their brain's going to come up with rationalizations for why it would be okay. And it's just again, a really, really good thing to know. So that's where I think that we have the most success in our lives if we have a qualified person who can mirror us back to ourselves, who can give us feedback. And I think that for some people, initially therapy provides that, and therapy can be a very effective place to get feedback. You say all your crazy things out loud, and then, the therapist can reflect back like, I don't think that's a really rational approach. I don't think that that's a decision that is going to get you the results that you say you want. And then as we get more sophisticated, cognitive behavioral therapy may not be the way of it, but you may have someone you could go and take counsel with. I feel like I love knowing someone really well, working with them regularly, getting all of their story, understanding all of their goals, and then being able to mirror them back to themselves and say, I think this would be the outcome if you go down this path. And I think this part of you has an agenda, and I think you're not looking at this part of the picture. And it's really powerful to have people in our lives who know us well enough to give feedback, because I'm definitely not a fan of all random feedback. We get so much feedback, and most of it is people with their own agendas who don't really know us, who don't understand us, who maybe don't share our values. You could post something random on Facebook and people would have a bunch of opinions about how you should do you. I have a whole list of people who are restricted, so they can't see anything I post to my friend circle on Facebook. And on that list are just people who can't behave. I'll say, I don't want feedback. I don't want suggestions. I just want empathy. Or, you can tell me your own story of how you're dealing with something. And they just can't resist trying to tell me about law of attraction. I found myself recently in a conversation when someone I knew was mansplaining law of attraction to me, the 101 principles all earnestly. And I was sitting there going, my history, my background, I've been doing this professionally for 20 years. You've heard some of my recordings. Why, oh, why is this going in this way? But he was just on I figured out all the solutions, that kind of place that people sometimes go, they've found all the answers in the new thing that they're trying. And that was kind of the space he was in. So, no circuits really open to see how he was landing. So I think it'll be a while before, I try to hang with him again. But a lot of times particularly with energetic or shamanic or metaphysical stuff, you're particularly vulnerable to not being able to differentiate on your own between magical thinking and really utilizing super effective principles. And so I am a huge fan of aligning energy and magic and intention and work with the guides combined with right action to get really good results in life. Like that is just my jam. I love doing that. And yet sometimes I see people or run into people who have really spun into magical thinking. And that's the person who's staying home, taking no action, convinced that if they just visualize law of attraction well enough, they can manifest unlimited wealth by winning the lottery if they buy a ticket once a week. And I just haven't really seen that work. And I think that sometimes people are really vocal because there's nothing like somebody who some niggling part of themselves knows that what they're saying to themselves isn't really true. That person's going to be the most evangelical and loud and intense about telling everyone in the world that this is all going to work out. And eventually those people who are in that kind of space start to sound a little bipolar and sound a little manic. And I honor that. I honor if that's where they are. They're really invested in the story that they've found the keys to the kingdom and everything's going to work out now. But there's also a part of me that's kind of sad because sometimes people can put so much effort into something and not really get particularly good results. Someone who's really earnest and really engaged in life, who maybe with a little bit of feedback about I love that you're using law of attraction, but here are these other 5 energetic laws and principles that if you weave it together with law of attraction is probably going to get you better results. So you probably want to work with this aspect and this aspect and this, and the net result of this would probably be much more effective. But again, sometimes people are just really in their narrative. They're in their story about themselves, their story about the world, their story about how magic works. And I honor that. Again, everybody gets to do them however works. And, if they're in that phase, I completely honor it. I just don't necessarily love witnessing it if they haven't paid me to give them feedback and also are receptive to it, would like to hear, hey, I would love to help you get there, and here are the different ways that this could work for you. So if you're listening to this and you're starting to think, I feel like I'm working really hard, I'm really committed, I'm doing everything I understand about certain energetic principles, and I am just not getting results. I'm not getting the results in health or money or relationship or something like that. It may be time to, for sure do some introspection, do some looking at it, but also get some feedback from someone who's qualified. And the person who's qualified is someone who's regarding you with kind eyes. So the friend who's really super triggered with you, who thinks that, they're going to use giving you feedback as an excuse to lay down some harsh wisdom, I would just take a pass on that. I don't think it's helpful. I have had times when I, opened up for feedback in some way and found out it was usually a man who was sexually attracted to me in some way, had some kind of an agenda where he really wanted to be heard about something. And so it was just really ended up being a super intrusive reflection that really came out of something that they were working with. So, the guy trying to give me money advice who probably hadn't held down a job for more than 6 months in his whole life and was begging on Facebook for people to send him money, trying to give me money advice. I'm like, I just don't think you're a qualified expert. I'm going to go look for somebody whose results I like to take counsel with. But he had wanted to charge me on a couple of different occasions because I'm like, I like you. I care about you. I'm going to buy something. Maybe I could give you the money. And he wanted to charge me like 3 to 5 times the going rate for the thing. And I declined. I didn't think he was going to provide the ride to the airport that was going to be so much spectacularly better than a regular Uber driver to justify it being $100 ride instead of a $20 ride. And for whatever reason, he was super triggered about that and took a different conversation on Facebook as a chance to comment. So this is all to say, if people have trigger with you, they're not qualified to give you feedback. You need somebody who's giving you feedback as a gift. And it should be consensual. And one of the things to pay attention to is the people who are going to have the best, most qualified, most effective feedback are people who are healthy enough to have the sense of respect for your choice that they won't offer feedback unsolicited unless they need to let you know about something that you're doing to them that isn't working. So if you forget to pick them up at the airport and they're upset with you about that, they'd probably bring it up to you, and that would be appropriate. But if there was kind of a bigger picture, it's one of the things that I didn't do when I was in my 20s, and people enjoy me a lot more because I don't assume that I have the best information ever and throw it at them non-consensually. I'm like, I have masterful skills in seeing the big picture, and people pay me for it. So I'm going to save that for my clients. And if my friends want that from me, the people I'm connected to, I'll wait to be invited. So when you're thinking about feedback in your life, you want to think about who's really qualified, who is looking at me with kind eyes, is in my fan club, cares about me deeply, isn't triggered with me, and has some wisdom that I would respect, and then consider offering them an invitation. And it's also worthwhile to recognize that, giving kind feedback to a place that could be kind of tender is a gift. So some people just won't want to do the emotional and mental labor that goes with that. So you want to kind of make sure that you are in a good energy exchange with that person. Or, sometimes people are really generous, but you may want to consider asking, what they would like in exchange and whether they would be willing to do it, and kind of approaching it from that perspective. Again, I don't know the nature of your relationship, so you may have people who are really, really generous. There are a lot of people who are just in their contribution. They have the good boundaries not to give unsolicited advice, but if you go to them, it would feel really good to offer their wisdom on a subject that they're qualified to do. You see this with volunteers mentoring young entrepreneurs. There's a lot of generosity out there in the world for that. And you may also want to just have it be really simple by hiring a really well-qualified professional. And this could be a therapist, this could be someone like me, this could be some kind of a life coach whose results you really respect. There's lots of opportunities. If it's not the right fit, feel free to choose again. But I absolutely love having someone that I go to and I empty my basket of everything that's on my mind. And it helps keep me honest because if there's something that is painful that I'm distracting or numbing or not looking at, it gives it a space to come out. And the person that I work with is really good at asking the kind but pointed question that will kind of reveal something that I might not even know I'm hiding from myself. Because my go-to when I'm feeling an emotion I don't want to feel is to numb. And then I have to, apply other tools and techniques and skills rather than that. But it's not a knee-jerk go-to, oh, I'm having a feeling, I should lean into that and be present with it. It's more of a like, I wish this thing would go away kind of response. And so for me, it's really valuable to have the time and the space and to pay the person, because then he's there for me. We have a clean energy exchange and there's a continuity of going to him regularly. So even though I feel really healthy and I really like my outcomes in life, part of the maintenance, just like drinking plenty of water and eating enough vegetables and moving my body, is facilitated inquiry and feedback. And I think it's just a really powerful piece because, again, if we just do introspection, we can go down the rabbit hole and we don't know when we shift from looking at ourselves in the mirror in a really clear way into telling ourselves a story because we have an agenda that we don't realize. And if you have an effective person who can mirror you back to yourself, the friend who's seen you through all the ups and downs of a terrible relationship isn't going to collude with the part of you that's like, well, I'm kind of lonely and I'm kind of horny and, I could just text him or I could just text her and it would be okay. I just know now not to get my emotions involved. And, that person could say, you've never been able to do that. You've tried that 3 times. It totally didn't work for you. Please don't put yourself on that path of suffering. Watch a movie, distract yourself, this whatever you're feeling, like what are you feeling that you're trying to get away from, that you're wanting that experience? And this could be a person, this could be a drug, this could be alcohol, this could be a shopping addiction, this could be, over exercising, if that's your avoidance. Like we can use anything to numb our feelings. And it's just really good to know when our mind takes on an agenda of trying to meet a need or avoid an uncomfortable feeling. Because usually when the mind's rationalizing something and telling us a story that is not true, it's making up a story that is not factual or distorting evidence in some way. There's either a longing, we want to have something that'll feel good, or there's a strategy to avoid pain. And we're rationalizing, a need that we're trying to meet, probably in a not very skillful way, because the needs that we attempt to meet that require lying to ourselves don't tend to go all that well. And so I just want to offer this as kind of some discernment for moving through with other people, because I don't know that people always put these kind of distinctions into words. And one of the things I love being able to do is just to sort really, really quickly for whether I want to lean in, because I meet all kinds of beautiful, luminous souls. There is so much soul beauty to the old souls that are incarnate. There's a richness of incarnate old souls because the game is really interesting right now. We're doing this collective thing where the destiny paths of humanity could go some different ways, and we're working together in just amazing ways. So many souls in transpersonal service to the world and finding ways to offer their gifts and working out their own health and growth and figuring out how to thrive being them. It's a cool, rich, potent time. And I love the people who are incarnate in the world. Not all of them, there are ones that aren't my flavor, but there's a lot of neat incarnate souls. But for me, I can see someone's soul beauty, but as I've gotten more mature, I have the discernment to very quickly assess whether, if I get blinded by that soul beauty and try to sustain relationship, it's going to be hard on my tender, loving heart because they're just not particularly emotionally mature or emotionally healthy. And for someone who has a really beautiful heart and a longing to connect and terrible skills, and I can speak to this from having been on both sides of it, there's such a hunger to connect that there's a lot of pain and intensity that can go with it. So it can be really kind to be nice to someone who's lonely, but it can create a lot of backlash if you meet a need really deeply for someone who's hungry and not skillful enough to meet that need, and then don't want to make it your daily business to meet that need. There can be a lot of backlash and hurt feelings and anger and sense of betrayal, and it's a interesting kind of conundrum to pay attention to. And so some of this really quick discernment that says, how close is their sense of self to who I experience them to be? Do they, do rapport well? Do they see how they land, and are they available to be really present with me and to respond? Or are they kind of in an agenda of just wanting to be heard and witnessed, which can be kind of tedious after a while? And for yourself, if you're not getting the results that you want, again, you don't want to go to feedback from people who are triggered with you or angry with you. They may have some really discerning things to say. And, sometimes after the waters have leveled, an honest, authentic inquiry, of wow, what was it like for you? Was I impacting you in ways I didn't know? Sometimes that can be really powerful. But a lot of times it's better to go to people who can see you with kind eyes, can hold you tenderly, who have the discernment to give you a bigger picture of yourself, and can reflect you back to you for the parts that you can't see. And I would argue that it's hard to fully perceive ourselves, and people are distorted mirrors because they have their own triggers and their own agendas and their own wants. And they're just been times that I've been reflected back in a way that had very little to do with who I was. And as a result, it can be really powerful to have reliable, trustworthy sources of people who can help you to see yourself, help you to see your blind spots, so that they don't sabotage your results, and so that when a part of you has an agenda to rationalize something, you have a place to go check your work. You can go to somebody and say, hey, does this really make sense? I'm kind of feeling like something's a little off, and what would be a more elegant solution that probably isn't going to create as much backlash or prices in other areas. Because if you're an alcoholic who's been sober for a while and you rationalize a reason to take that one there drink, there's probably a lot of paying back the bank on the other side, probably more struggle to get sober again, probably more shame and sadness and disappointment. It could be a really expensive drink on the other side. And so it's okay. Like sometimes we do things messy and expensive on the growth path, but as I get older, I prefer to have more discernment with how I move through the world, and I want to offer that for you in case it's helpful for your journey. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.